We're live.
Hello, everyone. My name is Venerable Wade Buripano, and I'm here with Bhante J. I think probably most of you know us by now. Just in case, I ordained in 2014 at Makjan in Rayong Province, Thailand. Bhante J at Bhante Gunaratana's place down in the Bhavana Society, in 2016. A good friend of Empty Cloud Monastery. And today we're having the two of us are going to talk about Vesak celebrations. So we'll each take some time to talk a little bit about Vesak and then take some questions and answers afterward. Take questions afterward and answer them, excuse me. So let's see, we don't really have a plan for what we're going to say other than the general theme. So perhaps I'll invite Bhante J to see if he has any opening reflections he could start us off with.
So, yeah, Vesak is an interesting thing for me because, I grew up Catholic, so I grew up with Christmas and Easter, and these holidays hold a kind of a deep, I don't want to say meaning per se, but a deep, because I grew up with them, because they're part of my culture. And because, this was something that was always part of my life growing up, it was something that was, like I had a strong connection to or a strong attachment to. But Vesak and Katina were things that were something that was different, right? These are, as I was becoming a Buddhist, as I was adapting, to a new culture, and I was, kind of in this point where I was like, well, I am letting go of all things, and I'm not going to be attached to certain, to get attached to new things, and all of a sudden I go to my first Vesak, and there's this, it's like a huge, big event at Bobina, and there's all kinds of people, and and I actually met so many. The first Vesak I went to at Bobina, I met so many other like Western practitioners, and I said, "Oh, this is actually a good event. I kind of like this." And I can actually remember when I would go to Bobina and go to the Vesaks, for over the years that I visited before I became a monk. I really enjoyed the social aspect of meeting so many people, because when you go to a monastery, usually you don't meet so many people like that. And that's kind of how I view Vesak, is this time for, because people will ask, well, aren't there like lots of Buddhist holidays? And it's like, well, each country might have one or two, but actually there's not that many. There's Vesak and there's Katina, two things in the year. And this is a time where it's really a season, isn't it? It's not just one day, especially if you are connected with other places. Because once I became a monastic, I went to probably 3 or 4 different Vesaks in a month. This was a big month event of going to Vesaks and being with other monastics who you probably only saw once a year, and it's a good time for that. And it's also obviously a good time for us to reflect on the reason, right? The Catholics will say Jesus is the reason for the season, right? So Buddha is the reason for Vesak. We reflect on that. Really, this is what I'm so grateful for, is that there is this, we're stuck in this samsaric thing where we have to keep being reborn over and over again. But I'm so grateful there's a loophole. And I'm so grateful that there's beings that arise every however long period it is, that they find that loophole and then they teach it to us. Right? That's what the Buddha is. The Buddha is the amazing being, the amazing person who found that loophole for us and who taught it to us. Right? The loophole is what the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is a time, especially for those who are strong in faith, faith followers. This is a time that's, an important reflection. those of us who are Dhamma followers, it might not be as strong a thing. But even still, it's a good thing to reflect on, have some time to reflect on this system, this samsaric system, this Dhamma system, and the beings who arise who can teach us to get out of the system, right? Like getting out of the matrix. So this is my initial reflections about Vesak and why we, would use it as a day of reflection, as a day of faith, as a day of practice, so that we pay the best honors to the Buddha. Right? The Buddha says that the person who practices the Dhamma in line with the Dhamma pays the most respect to the Buddha. So if we do that, if we're paying the most respect, we're really practicing the Dhamma, then, we give the Buddha the most respect in that way.
Those are wonderful reflections, Monte. Thank you. I wonder if I could ask you a question up front that sparked my interest. I ordained in Thailand and have very little experience with Sri Lankan Buddhism, actually. And you mentioned Vesak and Katina as being kind of the two big holidays usually observed. In the Sri Lankan tradition, do they also celebrate Asalaha Puja and Magha Puja as well? Are they big holidays also?
So, to be quite honest with you, they probably are, but I don't really know a lot about Sri Lankan tradition, to be honest. Even though I was, Bhante Gunaratana is my preceptor. He was very much into minimizing a lot of the, different holidays and different cultural things. Like he wouldn't, normally, like, they'll have like, a parade. People will have like a thing, a relic, and the whole community will parade, which is kind of nice. It's an interesting experience. But Bhante was very much not into doing a lot of those things. So I don't think I can speak as an authority on the Sri Lankan way of doing things.
Okay.
So, no, unfortunately, yeah.
Yes. So let's see. Maybe if I talk about set a little bit of context. I think maybe we have people viewing remotely who may not know kind of the context for Vesak, perhaps. I mentioned also Magha Puja and Asala Puja, three kind of big holidays observed at least in Thai Theravada Buddhism. So we have Magha Puja usually in February, celebrating the spontaneous gathering of 1,000 arahants with the Buddha without a prior arrangement. And on that occasion, the Buddha gave an important discourse we call the Ovada Patimokkha, the exhortation on the entryway to liberation, which laid out basic principles of Buddhism. It's very early in his career that he laid this out. And then Vesak Puja usually falls in May. Sometimes it falls in June because of difference between the ancient lunar calendar and then the calendar we use these days in the West. And so sometimes it falls in June. So you may find temples and monasteries observing it in this month. You may find them observing it in the next month. So it is, just as Bhante was saying, a whole season of Vesak. Then in July, usually in July, the full moon of July, we have Asalaha Puja, which falls the day before the monastics enter the annual rains retreat, or rains residence, actually, to be more accurate, rains residence. And that celebrates the Buddha's first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in which the Buddha laid out the Four Noble Truths, teaching the five attendants who had served him while he was striving to attain enlightenment. And on that occasion also, the first Sotapanna was born, Anya Kundanya saw the Dhamma while listening to the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. So the three major holidays observed in Thai Theravada Buddhism. There's at least one other one is a little bit smaller. Katina also is a big day, a big season in Thai Buddhism as well. So with Vesak, we're celebrating the birth, the enlightenment, and the passing into complete liberation, passing into nibbana, parinibbana of the Buddha. That's the one Vesak that falls in May or June. And it's usually on these three holidays in Thailand, they'll have one of the characteristics of it is they'll have a circumambulation of a holy or sacred spot in the monastery. So here, for example, at Empty Cloud, we did a circumambulation of one of the Buddha images on the grounds, out under the trees. It was quite lovely, and we each were carrying candles, incense, and flowers that a lay supporter had prepared for everyone. And this has some special symbolism. The candles, incense, and flowers each are a symbol. The flowers a symbol for morality, or as they say in Pali, for sila. The incense a symbol for single-pointed concentration, because of the single points of light at the tip of each incense stick. And then the candles represent wisdom, the light of wisdom that they radiate. So we have sila, samadhi, and panya, morality, concentration, and wisdom. The three aggregates, or the three categories under which the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path can be categorized, how it can be analyzed. And this for us I think had added significance for our Vesak this time at Empty Cloud, because we chanted the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta as part of the ceremonies, in which the Buddha says that he finally found, the way out of suffering, and that was the middle way, which was the Noble Eightfold Path. And so those of us who are attending could reflect on this resonance between the symbolism of the flowers, incense, and candles, and then the sutta that we were chanting. So it's quite a big holiday for religious Buddhists, because of this quality of worship involved, doing circumambulation. We also did some puja chanting as a group, and it says in the Dhammapada that whatever gifts and oblations one may give for an entire year, they don't equal the merit of worshiping one who is consummate. And so in traditional Buddhist countries, I know in Thailand, they place a very high premium on worshiping. And so people who might not go to the monastery very frequently, and they may or may not practice other Buddhist practices, would make a point to go for one of these kinds of holidays to do a circumambulation and worship the Buddha and the Triple Gem, thinking this is a great deal of good karma for them.
So since one thing that we should do is say hello to everybody on the stream. So hello, Rick. Rick is a long-time participant in the streams here at Empty Cloud. So it's good to see Rick again. Ron, Manal, Metika, Matthias, welcome. Usha. Karuna. This looks like the same Karuna who was with us for Vesak, and interesting name, Karuna Manasti Cat Cuddler. So hello, Karuna, Jayanta, Richard, Bhumika, Yankee, Luisa, Priyani, Sud, Gayantri, Tate, and Saw. So if you have any questions regarding Vesak, please feel free to type them in the chat. We can also continue to talk more about things, I suppose. But yeah, in terms of the season, one of the things that I spoke very briefly on, when I mentioned the month, was so literally, where Bobina Society is about an hour and a half, 2 hours from DC. And so DC has, 3 to 4 different Sri Lankan viharas, even a Bangladeshi as well. And so each one of those monks in all those different places would all go to each Vesak. And even in some places when there was a local Mahayana temple that they were good friends with, the Mahayana monks would come too. So it could be a multi-denominational or multi-tradition event, because this is something that all Buddhists do celebrate. Obviously, in terms of it being like this big holiday or big official holiday, that's actually not that old, right? I think it became a UN thing in the 1940s or whatever. But in terms of celebrating, this full moon in May, which is a very important thing, is very ancient, obviously, and the different cultures and the different traditions celebrate it in their own way. But in America, when we're all kind of mixing together, and you know, I think of the one place in Alexandria, not Egypt, in Virginia near DC, and there's the Bangladeshi / Sri Lankan Vihara, and right across the street is a Chinese, what do they call it? Pure Land. Right, so they're literally right across the street. When I visited there, I just go right across the street, and see the monks and things like that. So, and this can be a very good thing to be able to visit all these different places and to see lots of monks together. That was the first time I had ever like sat on a like kind of a days or a stage, and I looked around and I'm like with 20 monks. I was like, wow, this is like a little glimpse of like what it might have been like in the old days with the Buddha, to see all kinds of monks together. So I was from a place where there's very few monastics, 4 or 5, 6 monastics in the West. So I've never been to a Buddhist country where I might see like hundreds of monks together. So it was it was a good experience in that regard. Um, a lot of the people who would later become, who I found out, were long-term friends of Bante Ji and the monastery, and Bhavana, I met at Vesaks. Just random people that became very close friends. And then once I became a monk, Vesak honestly kind of became a little boring. It wasn't as fun. Because monks have to kind of do their thing, but with the lay people, they get to talk and meet each other and things like that. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of anything else I could say about Vesak. Anything come to mind, Tom? No.
Sure, yes. Dovetailing off of what you were just saying about the experience for lay people is something I've been reflecting on as well recently, in terms of I talked, for example, about one of the hallmarks of the Vesak celebration and of the other major holidays is the circumambulation, and that's the culmination of quite a bit of effort made by a number of people to make the whole event come together, both on the monastic side and on the lay side. So the monastics spend some time planning out and working out, what are we going to do exactly on this day, and what kind of chanting to do, and we'll give talks and so on like this. And the lay supporters of the monastery, for example, as I mentioned, they put together the candles, the incense, and the flowers themselves. And they also do a lot of other work, like, for example, here at Empty Cloud Monastery, the group of people came over and mowed the lawn, which was very good, because it had gotten quite long. It was looking kind of ratty after a lot of rain. We hadn't had a chance to mow it. And so people came over and did that, and they set up canopies on the lawn, so that everyone attending could sit in the shade as they listened to the chanting and the Dhamma talks. So many people brought food. There was a tremendous food offering, which is also another hallmark of the major holidays, a big food offering. And then, of course, so many other pieces like that, of course, have to be put in place for a ceremony like this to go off. And then, and then afterward, all the work, doing the dishes and cleaning up and breaking down the canopies and all this sort of thing. I was reflecting recently with all of this kind of stuff, that when I was in lay life, and when I wasn't going to a monastery to observe these kinds of holidays and to take part in worship services and so on, I would be meditating, oftentimes on my own, and I found a lot of value in that. over time I came to see that there felt like there was something missing also. There's a real benefit in the social aspect of these kinds of holidays. As Bhante Jay was saying, you go and meet other like-minded people, and you can take part in doing work, in performing service that feels really wholesome. In a social context, doing it with other people. And it brings a wonderful feeling of wholeness, I think, to the practice, and a sense of kind of belonging and fitting in and taking part in a community activity. Even something as simple as like helping set out the chairs or remove the chairs afterward. It's so simple and it's so easy and it's so mundane. But in another sense, it can feel very fulfilling, especially as you're there doing it with other people. I remember years ago, after a talk at a Zen center in Boston, I simply helped another man move a bench after a Dhamma talk, move it back into place. I said, can I help you move that bench? And he said, sure. And it was quite surprisingly, just based on that, we struck up a friendship by striking up a conversation afterwards, while we were drinking tea, and struck up a friendship that has lasted, I think, probably about 20 years, down to this very day. Become one of the most important friendships in my life, actually. And it all came from such a simple little thing like that. And so I think that points up the value of these kinds of communal activities also for our practice, for our spiritual lives.
Yeah, and I think most of the people on here know me fairly well, so you kind of know my background. But for those who don't, the reason why I do kind of, when I talk about like meeting people at Vesak and things like that, is because I didn't have like a community near me, so basically I was a lone practitioner. Right? I had no, Dhamma friends who lived close. I had no sessions I would go to close. Like all my stuff was online. And so finding a place where I actually could go and meet people and be with people was a great thing. So that's kind of why I think about, when I think about Vesak, the social aspect and being with Kalyanamitas is quite prominent in my my thoughts in that way. Tan, your story actually reminded me of my very first Bobina retreat. My job was to put the tables, for the meal up and back, with another gentleman for 7 days in total silence. We did this job. And then after the retreat broke, we ended up talking and we became friends from that too. Wow. So it's very, it's amazing the small things that you do that can happen. Yeah. So we do actually have some questions. Ron says, so do all Buddhist traditions celebrate Vesak? And I guess I would say yes. I mean, if there was some tradition somewhere that it wasn't a big thing, I necessarily wouldn't be surprised per se. But as far as I know, the answer is yes. I don't know.
I believe that's true, at least most of them. I remember looking on Wikipedia not too long ago and noticing that Vesak was celebrated in many, many countries. It was recognized as a holiday. So I can't speak for all of them. I wouldn't be surprised if there are, in those countries, if they don't have something called Vesak, if they have some other kind of celebration, honoring these particular events, the birth, the enlightenment, and then the passing into parinibbana of the Buddha. Of course, such important aspects of the religion. So probably.
So Bran says, what are some of the specific differences that the varying cultures, countries have in their Vesak celebration?
I'm not qualified to say personally. I really don't know. I'm pretty familiar, I feel like, with the Thai customs, but otherwise I can't say.
So for me, technically, actually, it's 15 years this year. 15 years ago on Vesak, I became a Buddhist. And it was at a Chinese Mahayana monastery in New Jersey. Most of the ceremony was in Chinese, so I don't know exactly what they said, but it doesn't seem very hugely different than the Theravada ones that I would see later. I'm sure obviously there's little differences, but it's the matter of, a celebration of people coming together in honor of the Buddha. Really, that's really what it's all about. Anything else is kind of just cultural and differences. But yeah, I have not had too much experience in lots of different types of Vesaks to make that determination. Rick is coming in with a question. Bhantes, is there a spiritual significance to celebrating multiple events in the Buddha's life during Vesak? Thank you.
Well, according to Theravada tradition, Vesak, we celebrate three major events from the Buddha's life on the Vesak Puja because they happen to coincide according to the ancient calendar. So what the Theravada tradition says. So even though these things happened, many years apart in the life of the Buddha, his birth, his enlightenment, and his passing into parinibbana, they all happen to fall on that same full moon day of Vesak, as it's called in the ancient lunar calendar. So according to a tradition, that's actually the reason they're grouped together like that. I think when it comes to spiritual significance, when we gave Dhamma talks here at Empty Cloud, three of us gave Dhamma talks, one on the birth, one on the enlightenment, and one on the passing into parinibbana. And I think we did draw some threads. There's some threads that connect the events. If we think about the vast parami that the Buddha had to develop as a bodhisattva, to develop to come into the life as one who's going to attain enlightenment, related to his birth in that lifetime, and then that connects directly with the enlightenment itself, because he had the raw materials, this parami, to attain enlightenment. And actually, as part of his enlightenment experience, he saw back through his past lives. It's a tremendous lesson in suffering. As he exclaimed upon attaining enlightenment, repeated birth is painful. And then going forward to parinibbana, the enlightenment that he attained, kind of reached final consummation in the sense of liberation at parinibbana, because then the Buddha was freed of the five khandhas and the body especially, which was causing him quite a lot of discomfort in his old age. And so while he attained to a great degree of liberation and enlightenment, he attained complete liberation when he went into parinibbana. So these kinds of threads connect the three events. Mm-hmm. If you have any thoughts about that,
No, was it the stream? I think I was part of a stream the other day, and actually the Bhikkhu Bodhi was on it, and they were kind of discussing the fact that it historically it might not have all happened on the same month, and there's back and forth. And somebody said, "Well, if it didn't happen on the same month, then we could just have more. We could have more celebrations. Kind of like how Christmas is Jesus's birth and Easter is his death and resurrection. Imagine having three more, three events during the year. So each one of those is quite important, right? The fact that a Buddha was, or a Bodhisattva, he wasn't Buddha when he was born, obviously. A Bodhisattva comes into the world. That's a huge event, right? That the fact that there is such a being, and that the being found awakening on his own, because it was totally forgotten. Again, also extremely important. And also, parinibbana is important because we have to understand it's very different than death, right? Buddha did not die. Right? Buddha, even if you say passed away, it's kind of Buddha parinibbana. He attained final extinguishment. That's something to celebrate. That's something to oh yes, this is something that we can do as well. When we have become fully awakened, our job is done. There's no more birth, because there's no more birth, there's no more death. No more sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So when you go out, when you leave the final body, as some of the chanting says, The wise go out just like this lamp, extinguished. Which is, to some people might sound scary, but to me sounds quite blissful. I hope to be extinguished in this very life. We'll see if that works out. But let's see. We have a question. Luisa says, I was too shy to say hello at Vesak Bante. Oh, that's kind of sad. Well, hello, Luisa, and don't feel too shy, especially me. I feel I'm quite approachable, even though maybe there's a lot of people and things like that. I like to meet people, so always feel free to come up and say hello. So Sud has a question. Dear Venerable, celebrating Vesak seems so artificial. For example, putting water over the baby Buddha. I have a hard time buying into it, making any merit. Where is the merit present in this? So do you mind if I?
Sure.
Okay. So honestly, I think what has to be understood here is the difference between Dhamma follower and faith follower. I think a lot of the things that somebody from outside of the Buddhist culture, you might not feel an attachment to doing pujas or having an altar and all these kind of things. And one thing that we should be on guard for is looking down on these things or thinking that they're useless or stupid or from a bygone age or anything like that, because that's an arrogance and it shows our misunderstanding. So for me, most of these things do nothing. Pujas, Buddha statues, altars, they really don't do anything for me, to be honest with you. But that's because I'm a hard-headed Dhamma follower. I have met people who are sincere, powerful faith followers. And for them, all of these things are very important and they're part of their path and they're part of their practice. Right? So we should be okay with, well, this is just not for me. And that's okay. Right? I know what I need to do on my path. And for other people, that's what their path. All these things can be very important. In the beginning of my Buddhist times, even before I was Theravada, when I was going through the different traditions and I was, looking into Tibetan, and I had the little wheel that goes around and all these kind of things. And I had an altar and I tried it all, but it just didn't do anything for me. And so I let it all go. And I never had an altar since, because I just don't feel like I need it. But for some people, it's a central location for their practice, right? And it's something that they do every day, and they put the water and they put the food and they put the candles and all these things. And as Tom was talking about, the meanings for all of these things, right? It's for some people, for a lot of people, that's very important and it's part of their path. And for other people, it's not part of their path, and both are okay. Right? The Buddha allows for differences in the suttas. You can see it quite clearly. He even will say, I recognize diversity in this case, meaning I recognize that different people are different and their practice will be different depending on their proclivities, their past karma, all kinds of things like that. So this is what I would say about that.
If I might add something, Sue, great to see you writing in with a question. It was nice to see you here at the monastery meditating recently as well. Sadhu, sadhu. I think this is a good question. What is the merit in bathing the Buddha? I really like Bhante Jay's response. Thank you, Bhante Jay. It's something that I used to think about quite a bit. For example, with the candles, incense, and flowers, the traditional way it's done in Thailand is. I talked about the symbolism, but I used to think about this kind of thing in a different way. I used to think about it just if we put this up to the Buddha image, we walk around a Buddha image, and then we put this up and offer it to the Buddha image. What good does it do the Buddha image, or what good does it do the Buddha? Does the Buddha want flowers? And I used to think about it in a very kind of coldly analytical way, like this, and think, how can this actually be meritorious if we're giving something to the Buddha that he can't use, he's not really interested in anyway, perhaps, and the Buddha's beyond sensual pleasure, so what interest does he have in flowers, for example, and this kind of thing, and so I can certainly understand that mindset, and as part of it, I actually could be quite aversive years ago to this kind of a practice. And I think over the years, kind of unraveling that, partly through going through the experience and seeing what is it like if I kind of give it a chance, and see what is kind of the impact of it. And if I think about it a different way, it says, for example, I quoted the Dhammapada earlier, that the gifts and oblations don't match the merit of worshiping one who's consummate. And if we see it as simply a form for performing worship, so for example, we might, when we go into the meditation hall to practice meditation, we might bow to the Buddha image. And this is a way of expressing our worship for the Triple Gem. But if we stop and think about it, actually, that's simply a form for worship. And we could turn a critical eye on that as well. What difference does it make to the Buddha image, if I'm moving my body around like this, if it's in this particular form? We think about, and actually in other cultures, for example, I think about bowing the way we did it in Thailand, What about the way that they bow in Tibet, For example, this is a different style of bowing. And I might say, well, what is one way better than the other way, or something like this? But then if we go back to the thinking again about, well, this is just an expression. It's just the language that we use in a way of bringing forth this quality of worship that personally I find inside feels quite good. And so that's kind of thinking about things in this way is how I kind of made friends with the flowers, incense, and candle circumambulation, and seeing all the people walking around the Buddha image in the same very beautiful form, a form that we can kind of agree on as a community, to give us a form to practice within harmoniously. Then it looks so beautiful to me, and I find it quite inspiring. And remembering that after all is said and done, whether it's bathing the Buddha image or it's using candles, incense, and flowers, and so on, it all comes back to this is an expression of my worship for the Triple Gem, and I personally think that's quite meritorious. I wonder if we think about it another way. Actually, may seem kind of humorous, but what if I think, Sud, you have children. What if your children said, on your birthdays, Dad, I bathe a statue that I have of you at home as a way of showing my respect and my admiration for you, and worship for you. This is quite something I think any of us would be surprised to hear from our child in modern society. But if we reflected on it, we'd say, well, boy, if he's doing that, he must really love me, and bring up quite a good feeling. We can see, well, however our son or our daughter expresses their love for us, if they go to some extent to do it, then it feels very good, and we know that it's quite genuine.
All right. So we are at 8:40. So I guess we can check to see if give it one last call for any questions or anything related to Vesak, and give it a couple of minutes. And if no questions, then we can call it a morning. There will be a session tonight, although not from here. I don't know which monastic will be doing the evening session tonight, but there will be somebody doing it.
Right. Probably 7:30 p.m.
Yeah.
Wonder if our yogis or if Bhante Metiko have a question related to Vesak Puja. I guess we thoroughly covered it. No questions at all. So.
Question.
Oh, okay. We have a question.
What is the meaning of the circular ambulation that we do?
Circumambulation?
Yeah.
Sure. Well, it's a sign of worship. Traditionally, we for the circumambulation or walking around, so for walking around the holy site, the case here at Empty Cloud is walking around a Buddha image. We walk around the Buddha image typically 3 times. It seems like we have a tendency to do things 3 times in general. When we request the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts, we request them 3 times. Then we do the 3 refuges 3 times, for example, and so on. And many times this comes up, we do a Dutiyampi and a Tatiyampi of what we're doing. And so I think many of us think of it as the first go around worshiping the Buddha, the second time worshiping the Dhamma, and the third time worshiping the Sangha. This is quite common also. We might do the same kind of reflection when we bow 3 times to a Buddha image, each one of the triple gem. We typically walk around with our right shoulder to the Buddha image. Or to the sacred site. This is very traditional. Actually, it shows up in the Pali Suttas. That this is the respectful sign of the body to show towards somebody that you respect. And so when people respected the Buddha, when they were departing from him, it says that they would rise and then they would depart, keeping the Buddha on their right. And so that tradition comes out to us to the present day, and circumambulation is always done in that direction. I wonder if there are any other ideas about circumambulation.
Yeah, I learned the shoulder thing. Well, I read it in the suttas, but when I was a new monk, I had just come back for something, so I had the travel robe on, so the robe on both shoulders, and I paid respects to Bhante Ji, and he says, from now on, make sure that your shoulder is open. I said, oh, okay. So that was a first experience for me to I was like, oh yeah, just like in the suttas. Duh, I should have known that. So yeah, it is something that you can see quite clearly that people did respecting the Buddha in the suttas. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for coming and asking questions and being a good audience as always. So we'll see you from Empty Cloud tomorrow morning. Aya Suvijana will be doing a sutta discussion and reading, and then we'll have monk chat Friday night. But again tonight, 7:30 from a monastic outside of the Empty Cloud grounds will be taking care of the session tonight. So, Sukhi Hotu.